Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of the conference. We are so excited to be here to talk a little bit about education policy, equity, and innovation. And ultimately, I think this is a panel about leadership. We have some incredible leaders up on the stage who have heralded states and districts and federal and state and local policy initiatives that have changed the lives of millions of students. I'm going to do brief introductions, and then we're going to jump right into questions. We'll make sure to leave time for audience questions, and I hope you guys will engage with us. My name is Romy Drucker. I am the co-founder and CEO of The 74, which is a nonprofit news site focused on education storytelling. We have the pleasure of writing about many of the leaders and policies that we'll be talking about today, and I'll just ask each of you to go down the line and introduce yourself and just give a quick summary of your work.
I'm Barbara Jenkins, Superintendent, Orange County Public Schools. We are in Orlando, Florida, and that surrounding county area, about 100 square miles. 208,000 students. They speak 200 different languages. They come from 200 different countries, speak 160 different languages and dialects, so a very diverse population, close to 70% free and reduced lunch. We are certainly proud of some of our accomplishments. We won the Broad Prize in 2014 for moving student achievement and narrowing achievement gaps. Latest report is that we should be possibly outperforming 90% of urban districts. But that being said, we understand there is lots of work still to be done. If you look at the data, if you look at the numbers, we've certainly not arrived. We have miles to go before we sleep. 6 years on the job, 2 years prior to that as deputy superintendent. So I feel like I should have been paid for those 2 years since my superintendent announced his retirement 2 years out. But wonderful opportunities, wonderful mentors. Glad to be a part of the work, such critical work in our country, and honored to be with my colleagues.
Great. Hanna Skandera recently stepped down as the Secretary for Education in the state of New Mexico, was there almost 7 years. And proud that as I transitioned, all of our objective measures were up. And I, like Barbara would say this, that is not a spike the football moment. It is just a moment to say it can be done and we need to keep going. And our students in New Mexico, 75% of them are Hispanic or Native American, over 70% in poverty. And many at the time that I arrived said, it can't be done for our kids. What do you expect? Today, many in New Mexico say it can be done. And we have expectations for every single student that they can be set up for success in education. So the mission we had was to change our culture and the paradigm and the outcomes for our kids. We have a long way to go to deliver on that, but certainly on the right path. Prior to working in New Mexico, I served under Schwarzenegger, Governor Jeb Bush in Florida, the U.S. Secretary for Education, Margaret Spellings, and in the private sector as well. So got a lot of different snapshots of education, K-12 education, higher ed across our country, and excited to be here today.
Yes, Louis Ferebee. I am a proud member of the family business, currently serving as superintendent for Indianapolis Public Schools in my 5th year, and excited about where we are. I think the theme you hear today is that we've made progress as leaders of systems, but we're not ready to run a victory lap. Particularly in Indianapolis, we have moved the ball dramatically around post-secondary readiness, ensuring more of our students are truly college and career ready, and excited about that, but have ways to go. Indianapolis Public School is the most largest and diverse school district in the state of Indiana, and we have most recently redesigned our high school experience where students will choose their high school experience based on their college and career interests, and ensuring that more students are, again, truly college and career ready. So excited about where we are and excited about discussing where policy fits and ensuring that we continue that path of progress.
Great. Hi, I'm Lillian Pace, Senior Director of National Policy at KnowledgeWorks. We are a nonprofit foundation focused on partnering with policymakers, schools, and communities to really build the personalized learning systems that give every student the opportunity to pursue a rigorous pathway to college and career. We've seen a tremendous amount of interest from the policy level, both federal and state levels, focused on expanding personalized learning experiences for students, just like Louis just shared in his high school, creating different pathway opportunities for college and career readiness. And I think it's incredibly exciting. We're looking forward to building on that. And I think, one of the things I'm looking forward to talking about today is even though there's much excitement, there's a lot we need to do around quality and implementation to make sure this is done well.
Well, that's a great segue. I want to start the conversation at more of a macro level, and then we'll jump into the specifics. So it's an interesting moment in education policy right now, as most of you in the audience know. We're in the process as a country of shifting from one education law, No Child Left Behind, to a new education law, the Every Student Succeeds Act. And in that shift, we are loosening some of the federal controls that were implicit in the No Child Left Behind era. So this ESSA era affords much more flexibility at the state and local level. Now, in theory, that sounds like an opportunity. I want to ask each of you, and maybe we'll start with you, Hanna, since you authored a plan under ESSA, which was one of the highest rated plans by outside reviewers, as well as the federal DOE. Let's talk a little bit about the opportunities, but also what we're nervous about in this shift from tight to loose federal control. As I said, there are opportunities for innovation, but there's also advocates out there who are very worried about a de-emphasis on equity. So I want to have a conversation about that, and Hanna, let's start with you.
So first, just a small point of pride. I think we were ranked #1 on our state plan.
Number one ESSA plan.
Clear. I care about numbers. All that to say, plans are just plans. And we spent a lot of time. We did a huge comprehensive sweep of our entire state and visited communities intentionally with families, students, teachers, community leaders. So we cared deeply about that plan. But I am a big believer that we can talk a big game, but the action is what's going to matter when it comes to our kids and what's possible and where we're really going to go. So I think we're at a really important point in time in kind of ed history, if you will, ed reform history. I look at it like this. I feel like we were in a darling phase of education reform for the last 20 to 30 years. We didn't know it. We thought, if this is the darling phase, we're really in trouble because it was some pretty hard-fought battles. And we spent, I'll say this, and I own this, I spent a lot of time thinking about higher expectations for kids and then implementing them, accountability and then implementing for students, teachers, and schools, and choice and some of these pillars that we talk a lot about. And there's a lot of conversation right now of like, did they work? We spent so much energy. Here's what I would say, and the responsibility that rests on leaders across the country right now. They are a foundation, and they are so hard to implement. The battles around getting higher expectations for kids implemented are it's no small feat. A good accountability systems that actually measure for all students, not just some that make us look good, right? Real choice for students across the country. Deeply important. I'm wholly committed to them, but being committed to them at the time meant, I think as I talked about it, an unintended consequence was I said this is everything. I want to say it is absolutely necessary and foundational, and as leaders, if we leave those kind of pillars behind, we don't have a whole lot to know, to be able to determine whether we're making success going forward. However, they are a foundation, they are not the house. And I think the opportunity and the challenge for leaders today is to say, how do we ensure that we hold steady and constantly improve on our foundation, but don't lose sight of the fact that just because you have a good foundation, you don't get to spike the football. Mm-hmm. You don't get to say you're done. And so this is an exciting time for leaders, but with every opportunity comes responsibility. And I wholly believe that there is a deep and more challenging but greater opportunity responsibility today as we look ahead to what does education look like going forward while we do not give up ground, if you will, for our kids and for the hard-fought battles that have been fought over the last 20 or 30 years.
Reactions?
So I think Hannah makes some excellent points. And I think, too, Romy, it's important to acknowledge No Child Left Behind did something for public education and for children, particularly children in poverty, that had not been done before. And so we have to applaud both Rod Page and President Bush and those who pushed through that legislation. It helped move the needle significantly for Florida and did good things around uncovering underserved populations and making districts accountable for them. So I won't neglect complimenting that effort. In Florida, we've not had a plan approved yet. Our plan is still in limbo because I fear much in agreement with some of Hannah's comments that we're not pushing aggressively enough to move forward. And so while No Child Left Behind and Governor Bush's instincts and his governing around those issues really helped move Florida, some of our efforts have started to plateau, and so it really is time for, in our opinion, a new accountability system. So ESSA gives us opportunities for that new flexibility and some adjustments in Florida around teacher pay that's tied to our accountability system, around single school grades. Those flexibilities that are being provided, I think Florida hesitates on because we've made progress in the past. But if you look at the plateau, it might be a good time to make some of those adjustments. Our plan is in limbo, but I think the opportunity for moving the needle even further or to the next phase of our improvement, I think is certainly possible.
If I could just jump in, I mean, I couldn't agree more with this notion of a plan is just a plan, right? I mean, we at KnowledgeWorks have been, much to our dismay, reading all of the ESSA plans from draft stage all the way through. And one of the things that was really compelling to us as we read those plans is, how much momentum there was from stakeholders that really emerged, particularly in the early stage drafts, to really re-envision the education system and do bold and different things. But when the rubber met the road and plans need to be submitted, a lot of those really bold and exciting ideas disappeared. And so I think the message that we continue to advocate for with states is, remember that this plan is just the very beginning of a very long journey. Unlike under No Child Left Behind, where the federal control was so tight, there wasn't an opportunity really to amend plans or do anything different, and so we saw states really stuck with a particular law for 15 years. And I think the new Every Student Succeeds Act is set up a completely different dynamic where states have the opportunity to amend their plans at any point in time, and there's significant flexibility to do so. And so what I hope is that partners at every level of the system continue to engage and continue to push on these hard conversations, that technology opens up new opportunities and advancements that enable us to do things that we didn't think were possible when states wrote these plans this year. So while some say, oh, well, these plans weren't ambitious enough, they weren't aspirational enough, I think that's yet to come, and we really ought to approach that in a positive and supportive way for states.
So do you want to respond? Or?
I just think quickly, it reminds me of our district effort to move more decision-making to the school level and have more flexibility there. And when we announced it, it was great, and what we realized is there's some push and pull in implementation, and the professional learning that needs to take place with principals on design thinking and how to allocate resources and begin to think differently about how they do their work in a time where they were accustomed to a lot of decisions being made for them, takes a lot of thought and deliberate and thoughtful design of how schools may look differently. Takes a lot of work, and I think we're starting to see that play out at the state level as we have given more flexibility to states around resources and dollars.
What's the opportunity for visionary superintendents like you all under ESSA? I mean, and what about in those districts that don't have a bold visionary leader? it's a double-edged sword, right? We've just articulated some of the opportunity of the flexibility, and I hear, you know, Barbara and Lewis talking about, you know, we need an education reform 3.0. We've got to get over this plateau. We need to rethink accountability. We need to empower leaders. So there's that piece. So tell me a little bit about the push-pull. Lillian, what are you hearing from state leaders about how they're going to manage this? Because there's a talent piece to this. It seems like it'll work well in some places, but maybe not in others, or maybe you think I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the capacity challenges for implementation of this new law are huge, right, at every level of the system. You know, I worry a lot about the state level. I mean, we've seen, you know, staff reductions at state departments of education. I mean, it's not, you know, it's not strange to walk in and hear that a department is a third or even a half smaller than they were 10 years ago, right? And we're expecting these states to take on this, you know, bold, hard task of designing and implementing new education systems, and that's incredibly challenging. You know, we're also seeing, you know, investment in pre-K to 12 education hasn't recovered from the pre-recession levels in 2007, right? So we don't have more money out there to invest in this type of work. And so really it's incumbent on our leadership to think about, you know, new structures. I think in some ways, I think technology really has some opportunities to disrupt the way we think about this. So one of the interesting things that we're finding as we're reading through state ESSA plans is an increased interest in sort of redesigning the delivery of professional development and creating career ladders for educators and leaders using things like micro-credentialing pilots, right? So there were 10 states in their ESSA plans that said, you know, we really want to rethink the delivery of professional development. We want to put it online. We want to make it accessible anytime, and we want to make it personalized. And we want to do it in a way where educators can, you know, really begin to customize and stack different skills and credentials so that they can grow in their profession. And I think we're going to need to think outside the box about the way we reach and nurture the talent pipeline.
I think we're at this space where there's a tension between the flexibility to actually innovate and the tension between not giving, what I call throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Mm-hmm. With as far as the basics that we need to have in place to actually know if the innovation worked. So I think there will be an important tension. I want to push a little bit on what you said and out of my own experience. So I will say this, money matters. But I think it is a default position in education when we say, if I had more money or more resources, I would. I can tell you firsthand, in the recession, I walked in and had to cut my budget by a third, which means a third of the people, and we made a commitment to put the dollars in the classroom to districts and schools because I believe in that, and I do think that's where the money should be, by the way. And I think the innovation piece should be a bridge into solving some of these tensions around I need more money. And I'm not saying innovation doesn't often take an influx of investment, but I think we've got to guard against this idea that if I had more resources, you know, the world would be my oyster. I think resources matter, but they cannot be our end game of, and I know you weren't saying that was the end game, but I just want to push a little bit because we have an opportunity. We should not let resources be our reason and excuse, candidly, for not driving that. And that's not to, like I said, indicate that resources don't matter. It's just too often it's the default and across our education landscape that if I had them, then I would. I would say let's do it and prove that they work and then say, I need more to take this to scale.
So I think we are at a point where there's a double-edged sword. The flexibility provided through ESSA, and I want to be very clear, there is a federal role when it comes to matters of equity, Office of Civil Rights. We have to have that type of guarantee or oversight as a nation, as a country. And we also have to have the additional resources around equity, such as Title I and IDEA for children with disabilities. That part is critical. I'm very comfortable with the federal level backing off on some of their oversight if they take care to still reinforce those two areas. I believe there is necessary mandate for guardrails at the state level, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, several districts in Florida and certainly across the country are quite small and need some additional support. They don't have the expertise nor the resources to help them get after meeting the needs of all children. And so I think there have to be guardrails, there has to be support from the state level, because school improvement, school turnaround is not organic purely. It is not based on, we have this lifelong debate in public education or in education around art and science. Well, there's certain science to school improvement. We know certain parameters, certain things, certain frameworks will help improve schools. And so I think that expertise has to be shared at a state level, some level of expertise and knowledge, particularly for districts that do not have the manpower nor the resources, the expertise, I would say, in their local districts. My district, for example, we're the 9th largest in the country, so we've got a pretty substantial accountability department, research and accountability department. I would put up to our state department, in fact, but others depend on those resources. So that double-edged sword of this new flexibility runs a risk, if we're not careful, that districts that are smaller and poorer and communities that are typically underserved won't have the support and the guardrails and the baseline framework for school improvement and helping children succeed.
I want to ask the three superintendents to talk a little bit about some of the emerging pockets of innovation in your district that you're most proud of, and at the state level, Hanna, or if you want to talk about a particular district that you work closely with. And then Lillian, I'd love for you to reflect a little bit on the national landscape. If these are things you're seeing nationwide, I mean, the big question of education reform is always scale. We see things that we are excited about, they're working, we do studies, and then all of you spearheaded and are spearheading incredible initiatives. Tell me what you're really excited about right now, and let's talk a little bit about feasibility in this new policy world of maybe expanding that work statewide and even nationwide. Barbara, I'm going to start with you.
So we have so many things, Romy, we're excited
so
about.
many success stories. But
I wasn't going to say success story, but things we're excited about
Yes.
that I think are leading us into the future for our young people. Probably the one I'm most excited about currently is around digital learning. In Orange County Public Schools, we distributed devices, laptops to our students, over 100,000. So we have 1-to-1 ratio for middle schools and high schools. I should mention, we went through a period 4 years ago when we started this rollout where that R&D department I mentioned earlier really ran it like a research project to determine the best devices for what we needed, the best platform, the best provisions that were going to serve our operating system, that were going to serve our needs. And then we moved from there, from R&D to production, to actually getting them out to all of our schools. And I also want to be very clear, computers don't teach children, laptops don't increase student achievement, they are simply tools. If you have laptops with poor teaching, you still have poor student outcomes. And so we've worked very hard around training, professional development for our teachers on how to make sure they use that tool to the benefit of our students, moving us toward a more personalized learning environment for our young people. Because I think the opportunities are vast if we augment what we're doing with technology. I also think, and our research has proven this as well, that we can better motivate and encourage our young people with technology because they're digital natives. It's the world that they live in. And unlike one former board member who thought we should just stick with workbooks and chalkboards, our students won't stand for that. They don't live in that kind of environment. You can't ask them to turn off and power down when they enter the classroom in our school setting. So we're very excited, have some very provocative initiatives going on around digital learning and curriculum and practices in our classrooms that have proved to be very promising. Now, we're able to do that because we have resources of a half-penny sales tax that our voters approved in the 70 range, a very high approval to tax our community to make sure our students would have the latest technology. So it's not just the laptops, it's also digital devices in our classrooms that help our teachers as well. I think it is something we have to invest in where we are capable, because it is the world that our children will live in, both for career and for college. There's also a concern around digital divide, so we have partnerships. We keep our libraries open late. We have public libraries that give them connectivity, and Sprint and others are partnering with us so children who don't have means can go home with a hotspot to have that access as well. We're very excited about that.
Lewis?
Yeah, so much. I think as we talk about equity, what we've done with our weighted student formula and truly allocating dollars to schools to ensure that there is equity there, and we are looking at where we have challenges and ensuring that schools are funded accordingly. And the transparency that we have on that, I think, is phenomenal. We're the only school district I know in our state where you can go to our website and there's transparency on every dollar that goes to the school on a per pupil basis. And I think, as ESSA evolves and more school districts are required to do that, I think we have been a trailblazer in that effort. We're also one of 5 school districts that applied for the pilot for blending federal dollars with state and local funding. And so we felt like we jumped in on the deep end of the pool there. We'll see how it plays out. When we did that, our state department said, wait, we don't know how to do that. We said, well, figure it out. But so if we are approved, we should know in a couple weeks the ability to eliminate some of the regulatory requirements around Title II, Title I, Title III, I think is very promising. And the ability to allocate those dollars to our schools in one stream, I think is a tremendous opportunity. I know as a principal, I would be frustrated often. I've got my Title I budget, and then I've got my local dollars that I receive from the district, and knowing that our school leaders will have one stream and the flexibility to make decisions on the local context they have about their students and their families, I think is something that we will leverage and take advantage of, and could be a model for districts across the nation on how to do that really well.
That's huge. That's awesome.
It's amazing.
I mean, that is really, really big. A few things that come to mind in New Mexico, and then I might take a minute and comment on where I think we're headed to in the kind of this evolving space of flexibility and opportunity when it comes to things like technology, and how do we use them in ways that aren't just, check the box, we've got computers, or what have you. So in New Mexico, big piece, and I don't mean that disparagingly, I mean that's important, but you said it, right? How does that become a tool that really leverages student outcomes, not just a feeling like, great, we're a little bit more technology savvy. We made a commitment to have broadband, high-speed internet connectivity across our state. Now you might be like, we got that. I just want to say, we didn't have that. And we had families driving 50 miles to sit outside libraries to have connectivity.
Wow.
So basic commitment to close those gaps is huge, and in process in New Mexico in a very significant way. I was thinking of Matt Montano is the Deputy Secretary in New Mexico, and has done a phenomenal job of thinking innovatively about how do we use Title II dollars. I know this isn't sexy, but you know what? For years we've just, put a lot of money into professional development without seeing real change for our teachers in equipping them, and ultimately our students. And today in New Mexico, states submit plans that are aligned to taking our best teachers and incentivizing them to go to our schools that are struggling the most. And they're using their Title II dollars. They're creating plans that actually say we're going to invest in the things we know work and that matter for our students, and we're going to use the dollars we have and be creative as we go forward. There's a new carve-out in ESSA with Title I dollars and I think 2 states have taken advantage of it, to my knowledge, New Mexico being one of them, where you can take dollars out of Title I to invest in innovative strategies for struggling schools. It is very popular. Just a joke. Because you're pulling some dollars back from the Title I, flow, right? Barbara might say, don't do that with my dollars, right? But it's an incredible opportunity to ask the tough questions about, are our Title I dollars really serving our students we say they should be serving? And the answer in New Mexico is no, not enough. And so shifting funding streams to things that we know and believe the investment will have a return directly for our kids and our teachers who are making that difference was really crucial. We also, the majority of New Mexico is rural. I would say about 85 to 90% of our districts are rural. And another piece, really simple, we made it a priority to make sure that our districts had and knew how to utilize, and that sounds really simple, Khan Academy. We went from a 1% usage rate to our goal this year is 50% across our state in regards to our schools and our students. So there's small tweaks you can make by simply talking about access and equality, and then there's some fights you pick, right? Because they matter for kids and they make a difference. I think those are examples of things that we can do today with the flexibilities. I will just predict, though, that I think where we're headed, we have done not enough, in language we've talked a lot about alignment with and making sure our kids are all college and career ready. We're in process, but we have not delivered on that promise. And the promise is taking an awfully long time. So what's the tension between staying the course on some of those key foundational pieces, but also really pushing ourselves to be far more innovative? My gut is in the high school space in particular, as we link into truly being job ready, truly being college ready, and ensuring that our students can have a confidence as they transition and get their diploma, that it really means something. Not 5 years from now, not if they survive all the remedial courses and then make it through college, but now in supporting themselves and preparing them for the future.
Lillian, can you give us some national perspective? How do we get superintendents across the country knocking on these guys' doors saying, I want what you're doing, I want to do what you're doing, I want to pick the right fights?
Yeah.
Are you hearing rumblings that in this new world, like, do you think we might see some more interest in that? Are parents part of this equation? Are they the ones that need to be knocking on their school leaders' doors saying, why don't I have a one-to-one personalized learning approach in my school? Where are my IDA dollars going? Tell me what you're hearing nationally.
Yeah, no, and I love the way you teed this up, this question of scale, by starting with each of these incredible examples. Because this is exactly the way we need to think about this. Scale is not taking one solution and putting it into every single district around the country, right? What might work in Barbara's district or Lewis's district is probably not going to work in one of the rural districts that Hannah talked about in New Mexico. So we need to get away from that notion that we are trying to scale one solution nationwide. We also need to recognize that the rate of change in this country is exceptional, right? We are preparing students for jobs that don't exist. We have to be ready to be nimble and flexible. And so I actually think we need to think about scale in a very different way. And a big part of that is really redefining the relationships and partnerships between the federal and the state and the district level. And I'll tell you, whenever, at KnowledgeWorks, we go in and we talk to a state that's saying we are ready to do something innovative, 9 times out of 10, it's because they have district leaders who are saying, I want to do something innovative for my students, and you need to figure out a way to give me the flexibility to do that. And I think that's incredibly encouraging. So how do we get there? So we talk a lot about, with state leaders, it's, this isn't something that you need or should be solving in isolation. You need to leverage, the distributed leadership of these excellent examples across the country to solve this, right? So how do you empower your districts to hold leadership and find these solutions hand in hand with you? So we see this in some of the states that are trying to scale, new, innovative, next-generation learning models, right? They are creating these cohorts of district leaders that are creating and defining the change along the way, and I think that's an incredibly important thing to keep in mind.
I want to ask a question about leadership, and Is it a good time to be a superintendent right now?
I'm not going to answer that.
You don't have to answer that.
You already
one.
had your board meeting last night.
You know, we're talking about the opportunities in this new world of sort of flexible policy. We have some trailblazers up on the stage. There are, you know, lots of interesting superintendent searches going on right now around the country, lots of interesting candidates for those searches. Is it a good time to be a superintendent? And what would you say to someone who's thinking about taking a superintendent job?
Lewis? Or was that your final answer?
Yeah, that was
Or what do you say to yourself? You know, talk yourself into it a little bit.
I love the work, Romy. I think it is a good time to be a superintendent. I do think we have to acknowledge that the work can be grueling at times, and that every year, every month, we have someone leaving the profession. So I think there are challenges that need to be dealt with significantly for the role, but I believe it's a good time to be a superintendent because I believe in the work. It is my passion. Certainly, urban education is my passion, but education of our young people has to remain on the forefront of our democracy. It is the linchpin of our democracy, so it has to be taken seriously, and we have to have talented individuals who are willing to do the work. But it does include some sacrifice, and it can be grueling at times. But I would still encourage those who want to lead, who want to make sure every young person in our country have a brighter future. Certainly, I would tell them to run to the profession, well advised on how grueling it can be, and certainly well trained and well prepared for the work. And I think our nation has to continue. I heard Arnie Duncan say it both in D.C. and mentioned it this morning, that our democracy cannot be at risk because we fail to educate our young people. And so I am determined, and I know so many of my colleagues around the country are determined as well, to make sure that our young people remain a priority. So it's a good time, and we need more talented individuals. I think some people draw back when they see some of the rigor, some of the politics, some of the abuse around the job, but the work has to be done, and I love the work.
Yeah, I'm getting my own advice right now, but if I were giving others advice, you know, I would share that there's probably never been an ideal time to lead meaningful and transformational efforts. You know, so if we think about in our nation when we've had a major move and we moved the needle, it wasn't a time where it was ideal. And so I would encourage leaders to think about, you know, if they're trying to find the right situation where everything is going to be perfect, it doesn't exist. And, you know, if you want to truly be a transformational leader, you know, you got to roll your sleeves up and be prepared to do the heavy lifting. Mm-hmm. But I think in terms of this era that we're in, where we have new flexibilities and new ways of thinking and the ability to innovate in ways we haven't had in the past, you know, are great tools to have in your toolbox. I just think you have to know when to use the screwdriver, and you have to also know, you know, the difference between the flathead and the Phillips. I mean, all those things to really be successful in doing this work. So I think it's a good time, but it's never going to be easy.
Did you want to jump
One
in,
more
Barbara?
point. Yeah, I thought about it when Lewis was speaking. I don't want to imply that superintendents are the critical role to make sure that we guard our young people. While they may play a strong role, boards of education and other government entities and state departments are critical to the work as well. Because if we're not careful, we are sort of following this cycle where we can be headed back into more segregated schools, segregated neighborhoods due to housing patterns, unitary status districts starting to revert back to what seem to be the vestiges of segregation. I think the responsibility is far beyond the superintendent's seat and their strong teams that they've put together. I think it is for all of those in governing positions and in places of leadership that can have an impact to make sure our democracy remains intact.
Exclamation point. Thank you. Principals and teachers, I think that the wave of teacher leadership that we're seeing across the nation, I think is a very positive sign. And school leadership is critical. And school leadership can't just come from the principal's
Absolutely.
office. It has to come from the entire school. And so I think we're starting to see a lot of that happening. I mean, the more we can empower that to occur, we're going to see real change in our schools.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I'll say one thing personally, and then one thing kind of to riff off what just said. I remember 4 years into my job in New Mexico, I had not been Senate confirmed for 4 years. Took a little journey, and I was talking to my dad, and he said, "Is this really worth it? Marches outside your house, your office, all the fun things that come," and I remember saying, and I say this with deep conviction, not very many people get to wake up every morning believing in what they do. And not because it's perfect, not because you don't fall down a million times and have to get back up again, but because it is a true privilege and an honor to get to serve our students, our teachers, and our school leaders across the country and the spaces and communities we get to live in. So from a personal standpoint, it is always the best time because of the privilege. I totally agree with Barbara that you got to go in with your eyes wide open. But you said something that I really, I think is important. We can wait for perfect conditions. First of all, they do not exist. Secondly, I think great leaders, part of being a great leader is taking the conditions you have, seeing them for what they are, and beginning to say, all right, so what are my tools? What are the pathways that exist with the incredible team I get to work with and serve, which, by the way, teams matter immensely, and I couldn't have done anything without an amazing team. But part of the team, and it took me way too long to realize this, 4 years, actually. 3 years ago, now 3.5 years ago in New Mexico, we made a concerted effort to shift in engaging our teachers. And I own the fact that it took way too long to create multiple pathways for our teachers to have voice, leadership, and game-changing opportunities in their classrooms all the way up to state policy. And today, New Mexico is a leader when it comes to our teachers. We will have a teacher in every single school who is a teacher leader within the next couple months. That was our goal. We've launched no less than 15 teacher initiatives, teacher leader initiatives for voice, impact, policy. Talk about innovations. We have Slack. I don't know if you're familiar with Slack. Great. Our teachers communicate with each other on Slack, and you wouldn't believe the energy, the excitement, and the power that they are bringing to their classrooms and their schools based on their commitment. So I just think A, it's the best time. B, know what you're getting into, and C, recognize that your conditions are actually, in some ways, what you make of them once you're in the space.
Lillian, any reflections? And I'm going to open it up for questions to the audience.
I'm just sitting here reflecting on, I probably should have said this in the introductions, but I guess about 10 years ago, I was working on Capitol Hill, and I was on the committee that was trying to reauthorize No Child Left Behind. We had a pretty good feat in 2008 where we thought we were going to get across the finish line. And I just think about the tone of the dialogue on Capitol Hill then. I mean, this fear that if we relinquish any sort of flexibility to states or districts, we're going to have mayhem and quality will go out the window. And just how refreshing it is now, to hear these incredible stories like, Hanna just shared about the leadership pipeline they're building. And, I think we're going to be okay. I think it's a really encouraging time. And so, thank you to all of you guys for the leadership that you are bestowing in your own states and communities.
We have a couple minutes left. Questions, comments from the audience? Anyone want to sign up to become a superintendent? We'll be having a list in the back. No, just kidding. Anyone out there?
Could you say some more about this, the school boards?
So I I think most of you heard the question, but she asked, could you say some more about the school boards? And then we sort of had a long pause there.
The loading question.
I do have
But
something to say.
this is the political question,
Sure,
and to be honest, you all danced around a little bit. Hannah, you told your personal anecdote of what it was like, but you know, governance is a big question when it comes to the ability to drive change, and you know, each of you have experienced different structures, so tell us a little bit about that.
I have an elected school board by individual districts and then a countywide chairman. My board is phenomenal because they understand governance and certainly don't try to enter into operations. Very clear division. I am their CEO and they are my board of directors, and so they do a phenomenal job. I would acknowledge that's not always the case in districts, but I also have to acknowledge putting your name on a ballot to run for a school board member is probably also excruciating for the individual. So I applaud, and usually it's with no or little compensation, so I applaud individuals who want to serve their communities on school boards. I think we can do a better job of making sure they are prepared, that they are trained, that they do some team building activities with their superintendent so that they are perceiving themselves as part of a team with a co-owned vision and mission for the school system. So I've had very positive experiences. I acknowledge many of my peers have had issues around the politics of elected school boards or appointed school boards for that matter, but they are a critical part of the leadership team if a district's going to be successful. I think the real tragedy is that there's turnover in leadership. I don't know any other profession, any major corporation that can turn over leadership every 3 years and be successful. And so part of that issue has to be building relationships and clear understandings of roles and responsibilities for superintendents and their boards.
Anyone else want to add anything?
Yeah, I think the churn is a real issue. In 5 years, I only have one board member that's been there the entire time. And so this notion of being a team is really critical because when board members are elected, they all have good intentions and agendas, but you have to come together as a team and have core beliefs and an agenda and priorities that the team can embrace, and you don't have 7 or 9 or however many board members you have, silos and different agendas. And finally, leadership for an organization always starts at the top. So the governance team struggles, oftentimes the district will struggle. And so it's important to remind the board and the superintendent that you got to play nice and got to play well together if we want to get meaningful change for the district.
Good morning, and thank you for your remarks. I have a question about procurement in your districts. We have hundreds of companies here which are pitching business services, and many of them are pitching as services for students. I'm curious, can you talk about your procurement competencies that you're putting in place and your governance? So are schools allowed to make decisions in your districts whether to bring on an ed tech service? Is that a district decision? Like, how do you balance your oversight versus giving your schools flexibility to make those?
So we've gone through a couple of different iterations around flexibility at the school level. I think probably most districts across the country went through this period of time where principals were the decision makers around procurement. It's dangerous. In urban districts, especially in larger districts, we know better student achievement is an outcome if you have some centralization of curriculum, of testing, of professional development. And so Orange County went through a transition just before I arrived where they brought more of those decisions back to a centralized arena. Now, that does not mean that principals are not engaged in the procurement process, but it has to come under certain guidelines so that there are not abuses, and so that every principal is not receiving salesmen all day who all say that they've got the best product for them. We had, when I first came to Orange, my high school principal said, my God, we don't know what works. Every salesperson is telling us this is the best program for our readers. We've got 20 different interventions going. And so we re-centralized some of those decisions because the expertise, every principal shouldn't have to have all of the expertise to make those individual decisions. Secondly, we are very strong. Our procurement department has received awards. 94, 95% of our contracts we bid, we compete because it helps to drive the price down. I mentioned 5 years ago when we started our digital project. I don't need to mention names of companies, but I will tell you the cost of those individual devices went down significantly because of competition and because of sheer volume that we were purchasing. So we believe in competition, but we highly regulate so that we don't end up in the paper at a central office level.
Yeah, we take some of the vetting so principals don't have to do that. I think Barbara makes a great point. You don't want your principals having to make those kind of decisions. So we balance autonomy with ensuring that we've identified best in class for our principals, and then they have a menu of services that they can choose from. So there is district flexibility, but the district is ensuring that we are filtering what goes to our principals.
Well, that's a great thought to end on, that this is all about balance. It's about balancing empowerment and accountability. One thing, I just want to thank all of you guys for just always putting students first. I think that's the one thing that's, cut and dry here. And thank you for joining the conversation. Thank you to the audience for joining the conversation, Barbara, Hannah, Lewis, and Lillian. And we will be around for questions afterwards. Thank you.
Good job, Romy.